this hearing to order, the Ventura County Air.
I call this hearing together for to order for the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District Hearing Board, December the 7th, 2009. The time is 5:35 p.m. I'd like to ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Present.
Mr. Herlock?
Present.
Mr. Gasserfino?
Present.
And Mr. Murphy?
Present.
For the record, please note that we do have a quorum. I'd like to ask for approval of the agenda. Before I do, I think we have an announcement from the clerk.
Yes, Mr. Chair, on petition number 825, petition of Era Energy, the clerk was just presented with a letter from the applicant requesting that the petition be withdrawn.
All right, we have a petition to be dismissed. I don't know that we need board approval on that, do we, counsel?
Under your Rule 118, the petitioner may dismiss his petition at any time before you render your decision. So they have a right to dismiss at this point.
So do we, as a board...
It just should be noted for the record.
Okay, then so be noted that the petitioner, Era Engineering or Energy LLC, has dismissed for the petition. Other than that, I have a motion to approve the agenda as it sits.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I thought I'd save the clerk that responsibility. Okay, at this time, I'd like to ask if we could ask for the swearing in of the petitioners or individuals that will be speaking, as well as the district representatives.
Please raise your right hand. You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, thank you very much. This evening, then, we will be hearing petition number 827, the petition of PTI Advanced Filtration, Inc., for an interim variance from Air Pollution Control District Rule 29.C, Conditions on Permits, violation of permit conditions, Rule 74.6, surface cleaning and degreasing, and Rule 74.13, aerospace assembly and component manufacturing operations. At this time, I would like to ask the petitioners to please identify themselves, their titles, positions with that company, please.
My name is Jim Templin. I'm the Environmental Health and Safety Manager for PTI Technologies.
I'm Kenwar Suri, Senior Vice President of Operations, PTI Technologies.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to ask the petitioners to present their petition, please.
Okay, the petition came about. We're an aerospace company, and we manufacture filtration products for the aerospace industry, mostly filters, along with some modules, and maybe I can pass these around as examples. We manufacture some 5,000 different variations of filters, and those are representative of ones that we do. These are for aerospace. As part of the manufacturing process for quality control, we test these filters by putting them into what we call a bubble test tank. And in the bubble test tank, it's a leak test for the filter elements, and it's done for to test the integrity of the elements. They're placed under alcohol, IPA. Then they're pressurized with a low air pressure, typically from 1.5 to anywhere up to maybe 20 or 30 inches of water column of air pressure, and then we look for bubbles. When we're finished with that, the element then has alcohol in it, so we let it drip dry, and then we dry those in the bubble test closet where the alcohol vapors are then captured from that entire process, the testing process. They're sent into a catalytic oxidizer that we use to burn off the alcohol, or the ROCs. And right now the requirement according to our permit is a destruction efficiency of 90% minimum. We had been achieving that for many, many years. And just recently, we discovered that when we did a compliance test, and we were slightly below that destruction efficiency, and that was roughly a year ago. So we called in the OEM of the catalytic oxidizer, and they are Catalytic Combustion Corporation, asked them for help. They suggested that we send the catalyst modules back to their factory to have them chemically cleaned. So we did that. When we did that, they told us that the catalysts in those modules were about 69% active. So they cleaned them, and after they cleaned them, they came up with an activity of about 94%. So we reinstalled those into the unit, and then scheduled for another source test, conducted the source test, and that was, I believe, in January of this year. On that source test, we passed with a destruction efficiency of 90.3%. So we were meeting the requirements of the permit to operate. So knowing that we were that close, we said to ourselves we were a little bit, we didn't really know exactly where to go with that. So we went back to the OEM of the catalytic oxidizer and asked them for help. The OEM explained to us that there are two main possibilities that can cause the destruction efficiency to drop. One is that the catalyst modules are not very active, but of course, since they have been cleaned and were determined to be active, the other possibility would be some sort of a bypass loop inside the catalytic oxidizer. So we looked for that, but not having the expertise, because our expertise is in manufacturing filtration products. So we asked the OEM to come out, take a look, and see if he could find out where the bypass may be. And the bypass most often would come in the form of little cracks in the heat exchanger. There's a heat exchanger in this particular oxidizer. We did our own checking and weren't able to determine that we didn't see any cracks, so we asked them to come out and look at it themselves. They performed a test for us based on their experience, and they determined that there were cracks in the catalytic oxidizer itself. The construction of the unit is such that it doesn't easily unbolt, but it has a lot of welded construction in it. So in that, we asked them what our next step should be, whether we should have them repair it or whether we should go in there and try to repair it ourselves. And then we were told by the OEM that repairing was not practical on this particular unit. So at that point, we decided to pursue looking for another catalytic oxidizer. We did expect to pass the next source test, which was scheduled for the month of October. We scheduled that and actually performed it on October 1st. That's when we found out that our destruction efficiency tested out to be only 78%. So at that point, we had already been pursuing replacement oxidizers, and so we contacted the board. We received what's it called, a notice of violation, not the board, but the district. We received a notice of violation, so we put together a corrective action plan, and then we presented that to the board, and then they advised us that we should, not the board, excuse me, the district, then they advised us that we should apply for an interim variance, and that's what we're applying for here, so that we can continue our operations and so that we can also have the time that it will take to get a new replacement oxidizer using newer technology than the one we had, the one that's existing right now. And also, what we'd like to point out is that even though our destruction efficiency has dropped off, our emissions really are not as high as they would normally be, mainly for two reasons. One is we implemented a process to try to save alcohol about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and that was effective. So the usage of our alcohol has actually dropped. We're able to actually recycle some of it. And the other is that business has been flat lately, so our production numbers are down. So even though our destruction efficiency is down, we do still have control. And since our business is down and we expect it to be flat in the near-term future, we really don't expect to pollute, to be a nuisance to the community. Also, looking at the area where we're located at the corner of Del Norte Boulevard and Camino del Sol. There are no residences near that area. That's a residential area. There are no schools near that area. There are no daycares near that area. So that's why we're applying for the interim variance, so that we can continue with our plan to replace the oxidizer, but still remain in business. We hire currently about 215 employees, and the bubble test operation is necessary for us to stay in business, because that's part of our quality control. If we had to curtail that, we would have to shut down the plant, and we're trying to avoid that. Also, if we shut down the plant, people would be out of work. We would not be able to fulfill many of the contracts, well, virtually all the contracts that we have existing, and we'd like to be able to remain in business and continue with our corrective action plan to replace the oxidizer.
Mr. Templeton, is there anything else you wish to add at this moment?
I'm not sure if I do, but maybe Mr. Suri has something to add.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to add a couple of things. Like Jim Templeton mentioned, that the usage of the alcohol, IPA, has dropped. And we plotted that chart. I would like to share that with you. Take a look. It shows that at end of the October, the usage was way down compared to what we started usually.
Okay. Has that been shared with the district staff?
Not at this point. Not at this point. The district has the data, but not this chart itself.
Yeah, data was provided, and we made the graphical presentation to show all the points where we are today. And then the second presentation we have, like Jim mentioned, was that we implemented a couple of the processes because of the Kaizen, even because of the CPI, continuous process improvements. We added that so we can reclaim some of the alcohol, so the same alcohol can be reused to do the bubble point. And one more thing I'd like to point out is the efficiency is 90% based on so many pounds per hour. Chris done a great job of calculating, and Jim has done a great job calculating how many pounds per hour we are putting out compared to the permit. I think the permit calls about 12.28, and I think we are at 78% control, 6.56. The point I'm trying to make is that we are not using the tons per year or pounds per hour what was initially the permit was issued to us, So our usage is down, and pounds per hour is also down. And then going forward, because of the economy, our sales are flat, and we don't see going up any uses of the alcohol going up per month or per quarter, you know, because we look at this shipments and then we monitor how many elements we are fabricating and how many uses of the alcohol is being utilized in the plant. Those are the couple of things I wanted to point it out.
Okay, thank you very much. Board, at this time, I'd like to ask if you have questions of the petitioner. Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, Mr. Templin, if I understand your graph is on your chart on page 11 of the permitted emissions, and then the one that's on page, a couple pages later, 13, on your projected emissions, it looks like you're actually going to emit less than your permitted thresholds.
Okay, I don't see that chart in front of me.
Even operating at 78% or whatever it is. Is that correct? Because there's less throughput right now?
That's what we expect, yes.
And you anticipate it's going to remain at this reduced throughput level
In the
period during which you're going to be
Yes.
acquiring and installing the new
Yes,
oxidizer?
yes.
Thank you.
Well, I like to add on the same graph which you just mentioned. Typically, our year ending and quarter ending is in September, so the shipments spike up in that month. And if you look at the usage of that alcohol in those months, are pretty down. So we don't see any spike coming in the next quarter or couple of quarters. I would probably see the usage of the alcohol down compared to the September. Typically, at the end of the year, we want to push everything out to meet the numbers, but apparently I don't see that going up in the next 3 months or 6 months.
Thank you.
So the usage will be down.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
I don't have any top of my head with the amount of pollutants that we're talking about and the catastrophic effect of shutting the business down. That doesn't, the practical aspects scream out. But I am concerned about the rate at which, once this, it seems like a problem could have been, or to understand why it took so long from January of 2009, when you really knew at that point you were right on the edge and there were problems with potential problems at that time, that we had this long interim till we go to June before we really do another measurement, and then we get all the way to October before we kind of decide what we're going to do. And now we're out and looking for manufacturers and out for bids and selecting ones. Just explain to me why, if you can, why I should be concerned with the lags that at least are perceived, that kind of indicated that.
Since we have engineers at our plant and our background is engineering, but we're not experts in the air pollution control equipment, so we began trying to discover amongst ourselves and doing some of our own tests internally to figure out what was going on. We were in continual communication with the OEM all during that period, but it wasn't until June when we actually came to the conclusion or got their advice that said, yeah, we should come out and take a look at looking for any leaks in there. We actually did try to take a look for leaks ourselves, and when we looked, we weren't sure what we were looking for. We took some pictures of the internals and so on and didn't really spot anything, and so we ended up asking them, how do we know, how do we find out, how do we measure where leaks are? We thought about things like helium leak tests. We don't really have the technology for that. We thought about, well, dye pen wouldn't really work in a case like this, that we could tell. And in the conversations back and forth with them, that's when they actually said they should come out and take a look at it, and we were able to schedule a trip for them to come out and take a look at it.
Okay. And then, so that was in June, and then it seems like it went from June to October before you knew that, again, that you dropped from 90% down to 78% efficiency.
Yeah, we certainly didn't expect that, and I actually went out for bids and started looking for oxidizer manufacturers, reputable ones, before that time frame. I don't think that it actually shows in the record here, but we actually did start looking for them before that time frame because we knew it would be close. Well, at least I thought it was going to be close. I didn't expect 78%.
What, just for me and Nephi, when we're talking about an oxidizer, what is the expense or what's the problem in getting the specifications and going out for bids? For
It's a fairly large.
Oxidizer?
It's a fairly large capital expense. This will be over $250,000 for us.
And the specifications are somewhat complex in putting
Somewhat
them together.
complex because they need to know what the flow rate is, how many CFM of air, how much pollutant goes in there. They need to know the peak loads. They need to know what energy source. Well, energy sources is easy. We just tell them the gas and electricity that we have available. It does take quite a bit of specifying, yes.
May I add something?
Yes.
Going back to your question was why it took so long. Once we realized that we had this PM with the OEM, which is the CCC, catalytic combustion people, they've been constantly in touch. They asked us to run some fog tests, smog tests. We tried to do that. The construction of this vessel is a dual vessel within a vessel, and the heat exchangers tubes. There are approximately 78 tubes running back and forth, And we did open it up, try to see, is it the heat exchanger tubes the weld is broken or the shell within the shell is broken, So we tried to pressurize the shell. So we were doing everything, the guidance was being provided by the OEM. We tried to pressurize the shell, and we realized that it wasn't holding the pressure, so it wasn't the tube itself, it's the shell within the shell and the insulation were broken. That's when we decided this is out of the scope of PTI to fix it. And then the second thing was why it takes some time to define this statement of work. We had to write down what exactly we are looking, because this unit is almost 25 years, 22 years old. So we need to go back and understand what CFM we are talking about. And with the new technology, this is an old technology. This is a catalytic with the platinum catalyst, We wanted to tap into, if we're going to invest $250,000, we'd rather go into new technology where the ROI is pretty quick and fast, So we had to go back and define the right statement of work. Even today, I had an interview with another guy. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we did today, it lasts 20, 30 years, Otherwise, we're spending a lot of money. So we want to do our homework right.
And I would assume that once we get this online, it will be much more efficient than what you had before.
It will be, because the grants, we've been given grantees. The technology is new. RTO is a new technology.
Also use less energy, which is good for us because of the money, but it's also good for the environment and produce less carbon.
Thank you.
Okay, you have a question?
Yeah,
Mr. Furlong.
I have a couple of questions. But do you have a copy of the draft
Yes.
order? Okay. On page 3, there some in the background information. There's some indications of a couple of times when, and you described it, Mr. Templin, sending the units back to the OEM.
Yes.
And I guess you actually sent them back a second time. And the third time, apparently, that was done in your plant. But how do you accomplish that and continue to meet the requirements of your permit when your
when we
RTO is somewhere else?
Well, when we sent those back, that was during our Christmas shutdown last year. So we actually shut down the operation for a period of a little more than a week. That's when we had that baby scheduled in, pulled those out. As soon as we shut down our plant, our operations, then we pulled those out, air freighted them back to the OEM in Wisconsin, had them clean them, and had to pay extra money for those people to work overtime or during what would have been their shutdown, then air freighted back so that we could have the unit put back together and in operation the first week of January.
We're from the November source test failure until some point later when you went back online, were you operating under a variance order?
It was a short variance, yes.
Okay. Is these leaks that you were describing, is that a possibility of a fire hazard? Are these gas fired, these units?
They're gas fired.
Is there any concern that whatever is leaking could result in a fire hazard?
No, because the leaks are internal, so what that means is the process, rather than 100% of the process going through the catalyst modules, it bypasses them.
But isn't that going out into the hot part of the heat exchanger? I guess I don't need to know the details of the process. That was your answer is that it's not a fire hazard.
I don't believe it to be a fire hazard.
I wanted to try and understand a little better the hexane part of your operation.
Right.
I couldn't tell. Maybe it's there, and I just didn't get it. The IPA is in what you call a total enclosure.
Yes.
Is the hexane operation also in the same total enclosure?
It's a different total enclosure.
Okay, that wasn't clear. So there is the capture efficiency on both the IPA and the hexane are effectively 100%. And
Yes.
It's only the destruction efficiency that we're concerned with here.
Yes.
The table on page 5 of the draft order talks about tons per year, pounds per hour, and with various aspects. Can you estimate the percentage or split between the IPA and the hexane of your estimated emissions?
I can, but not from this. It's when I put my original data together, the bubble test operation I have, let's see. Okay, the hexane is less than 10% of the IPA. I see our hexane usage has been about 0.48 tons per year, about half a ton per year, and the bubble test is 5.76 tons per year, flush stand 0.32, so that's maybe a little over 6 tons per year, so the hexane is less than 1/10 of that.
Okay, so in this table of projected ROC emissions, it's, let's say, 90-10 as far as percentages of IPA.
Roughly, yes.
I'd like to ask you, perhaps it would be Mr. Suri that would answer this. Are you able to commit to the reduced capacity during the period of the interim variance?
Just looking at the sales number, yes, sir.
That's a commitment. It would help me if I know that the numbers here are something that you're committing to.
Yes, sir. That's why I plotted that out. Wanted to show you the usage in October 09 and September 08 is pretty should be very high, because that's the end of the year, end of the month. We ship quite a bit of those.
I think you're talking about something that we haven't seen.
Sorry. What I see on the books, it shows that the usage is down and the sales are flat.
So the reduced capacity refers really to the dip in your chart beginning from October '08 until the present.
That is correct, sir.
Yes.
And on page 7 of the draft order, near the top, you talk about something that happened on June 2009, and I think it was when the OEM was out there. It says the leaks were internal. That's internal to the catalytic unit rather than to your installation.
That is correct.
Yes, correct.
I'd like to ask you, if possible, to take a quick look at some of the things on item 7, on page 7. I'm sorry, and there are some figures, in particular under item 3.
Yes.
Are those figures correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, sir.
And the same on item 4?
Yes, sir.
Is the hexane operation as critical as the IPA operation? I realize it's not as big a
Hexane is a very small fraction. I would like to run down what the operation is. Filter models, when we make it and we tested them in the oil, whatever is specified on the ATP. After we do the testing, we clean it up with the hexane. Like I said, our volume has come down, so the cleaning process of the hexane has also come down. And so the total model, the volume is less, the filter element which goes inside is also less. So the numbers I mentioned on that number 3 point, that the sale is about 46 million compared to the last year, so it's pretty stable, flat basically. So to answer your question, the hexane is basically come down because we are not producing a large amount of the models,
The hexane is, though, an integral part of the production. It's required.
Okay, so, I was really looking to see if you could curtail that, but it's such a small fraction, even if you could.
It's a
Well, there's a few
0.4.
things. It is such a small fraction, but the modules that need to be cleaned with hexane, that is a requirement, so that's, yes.
I don't have any further questions.
I do.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Mr. Templin,
Yes.
these numbers, of course, are based on the October test of the oxidizer, which was 78%.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with the assumption that it's going to be 78% through June of 2010? I mean, because it already has dropped from, I don't know what it originally was, but it was well over 90%. What if it goes south in a hurry and it continues to crack and leak and degrade, and the efficiency goes down even more?
Well, of course, we don't have X-ray into that, but that's one of the questions that Kenmar and I took a look at. I don't believe it'll drop significantly from where it is, because whatever the crack is that developed in there, it's there now, and I don't think the whole internals will fall out of it or something like that, which probably would have to take place for it to have a significant drop from there.
Is that also the opinion of the manufacturer,
Yes, sir.
based on
Yes.
previous units that
Yes,
they've
when
had
he
there?
looked at the unit, he was here 3 days, and we tried to analyze that, what was going on. And he says, whatever is causing the bypass is going to stay there. It's not going to propagate. Once the weld is there, weld has come loose, so it's going to stay like this. It's not going to just fall apart. There's so many tube sheets, all the shells are in there. So it's not everyone is going to start opening up. It's only few of them. If you look at the percentage-wise, 90% versus 78, it's a very small fraction, which is bypassing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have several questions for either of the representatives. The first question is, referring back to page number 7 on the draft interim variance. The question I have under item 6, it says during the period the variance is in effect, the applicant will monitor or otherwise quantify emission levels from the source if requested to do so by the district and report these emissions, so on and so forth. Is it your intent to do this regardless because of your interest in ensuring that your limits are going to be reachable?
Okay. No, we're not going to disregard this. We have the handheld device which we rent it out and monitor the emissions, So we will monitor that. We're not going to disregard that. And also, on the other hand, we'll also try to speed up our process of implementing the new RTO.
Okay, so with the handheld device, you will record the data. I assume you would be submitting that to the district to just keep them informed?
If the district wishes, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Then the last part, or last question I have relates to what you just concluded with, and that is your schedule.
We had a meeting with the district a couple of weeks ago, and I presented the timeline of the whole process of getting the RFQ out, bringing in the summary of all the quotations, and making a decision. Since the investment is about $250,000, I don't have the authority, or my boss, the president, doesn't have that authority to sign up on that. It has to go back to the corporate. So I gave a timeline, and I think sometimes May or something. So this is the timeline which we submitted. We hope to have everything implemented, prepared by end of May to early June will be up and running. And this timeline, I submitted that to district and shared the whole process of statement of work, RFQs, and bringing the bids in, and then making a decision and giving the PO, and then monitoring, and then implementation.
Okay, then certainly when we get to the district's comments on the petition, I'd like to ask them to please describe or comment on the schedule. Any more comments from the board? Okay, at this time I'd like to ask the district to state their position with respect to granting the interim.
I have maybe just a couple questions for Mr. Templin and Mr. Suri before we go on here. When we met several weeks ago, you gave us your schedule, your project schedule, and your timeline for implementing the oxidizer project appears to have started with compiling quotes from your vendors about August 2008.
Yes.
So that was several months after June of August of 2009. So that was several months after June when you worked with the OEM. Is
yes.
that roughly timeline that you're looking at? Okay. You'd mentioned that your business is geared towards the aerospace, but you also manufacture, or do you manufacture filters for other industries?
Yes, we manufacture filters for, it's mostly aerospace, but we also manufacture a large volume or large quantity for the automotive industry. And then other industries that we make filters for would include fluid power, chemical process industry, and stationary engines and so forth.
If I may add, our business model is 75% aerospace, 25% is industrial. And the 25% industrial is our, what Jim just mentioned, is the automotive and earth-moving equipment and plastic injection molding, those filters. That falls into 25%, but 75% of the business model is aerospace.
Okay. I would just like to go through and maybe see if we can flush out some of the findings that the board might have to make. Your permit to operate does require 90% control of your IPA and hexane.
Yes.
So you're in violation of your permit to operate.
Yes.
The district's rule 74.13 is for aerospace operations, which requires an 85% control. So you're in violation of that rule also.
Yes.
And then the district's degreasing rule applies to the operations that are non-aerospace. So their industrial applications are subject to the district's rule 74.6 for degreasing, which requires 85% control. So you're out of compliance with that rule also. And I'm just trying to point this out because we do have the permit requirements are in violation of Rule 74.13 and 74.6. So just for the record, I'm trying to point that out. I think we've talked about the other most of the other findings that the board has to make. You haven't received any complaints directly regarding odors or nuisances, health impacts from neighbors, neighboring businesses?
No.
No, sir.
And during the term of the interim variance, if the board grants it, you'll continue to operate your catalytic oxidizer to the optimum performance that you can get out of it?
Yes.
Okay. And I think those are all the questions that I had at this point. And I'd be glad to answer your board's questions.
Yes, before, would you address the timeline? The schedule, please?
Well, the timeline. From what they presented to us several weeks ago, it does appear that they started looking for vendors to provide a replacement catalytic oxidizer about August. So that was the start of their efforts. And their schedule shows that sometime late May, they intend to have the new unit installed and tested, which I think for the project that they're putting in is probably a pretty expeditious implementation. That leaves, I just thought of another question for PTI. To what extent are you going to have to modify the ductwork in your facility to accommodate the new control system?
The new control system will go in place. The new oxidizer will go, well, excuse me, let me think about what you said. Okay. The new catalytic oxidizer will go into the same place as the existing oxidizer. The ducting system within the plant will not change. The ducting system, there will be a slight adjustment because of location outside the plant, but that will be fairly minor.
Okay.
If I may add, because I've been conducting these meetings, there won't be any change inside the building. Outside, we're going to use the same pad and move the existing catalytic oxidizer out and then put the new RTO. The only difference will be to hook up that stack to the building. So that will be just the location where it falls in. I was reviewing the drawing. That is the only slight change. Other than that, within the building, we have this airflow is coming from the same location. We are not making any changes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to the district staff on that. The board have questions of the district, please. Mr. Stubblefield.
Just one. Mr. Duvall, in response, one of the board members brought up that in the draft on page 7, number 6, during the period the variance is in effect, the applicant will monitor or otherwise quantify emission levels from the source if requested to do so by the district. And I just wanted you to say for the record, you do intend to request those, right?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stubblefield, for following up on that. Mr. Hurlop.
Yes, I have a question or two for the district. I wanted to make sure I understand the violations, partly because for Rule 74.6, subsections B1 and B2 were referenced in both the staff report and the draft, but my understanding is that the applicant is not in violation of either of those sections, because the draft order only refers to section B5.
That's correct. In actually, for both Rules 74.6 and I think 74.13.
Yes, you refer, and I believe in a footnote, to section B2 of Rule 74.13, but the draft indicates that it's only section B5 that they're in violation of.
Right, and there's a little bit of a nuance in both of those rules. In sections B1 and B2, I believe in both rules, the rules require that operations use low ROC materials, very low ROC containing materials in their processes. Because of the type of business that PTI has, the isopropyl alcohol is not a low ROC material, and it's one of the job requirements that they have to use that material. And then the same thing with hexane emissions, or the hexane that they use in their degreasers. So both of our rules allow higher ROC containing materials if they put their emissions into a control device. So this is kind of a fallback position for the situations where they do have to use high ROC containing materials. That we do allow them to use those alternate materials, but they do have to put those emissions through a control device and get the minimum 85% control. Did that answer your question for you?
My understanding is that the district is currently waiting for a completed application for a permit to construct, depending on what they come up with. Only after they've selected a vendor can they complete that to your satisfaction.
That's correct, yes. They have submitted the application for authority to construct to us, but as part of that completeness of the application, we have asked for the make, model, and manufacturer of the device.
And this is, am I right in understanding that this is basically a totally different technology? At least what happens inside the control unit?
It's
so, well, what I'm leading to is that it's not just a trivial change to their previous authorization to permit to operate or construction. It's a different construction, different unit.
Yeah, they're getting a whole new piece of equipment, a whole new control device. So it's not just a matter of replacing the internals or catalysts or something like that.
Is it even still a catalyst?
Is it a...
Yes, it's got the ceramic catalyst versus the platinum catalyst. Because the RTO technology is a little bit different than the catalyst, but it goes through a bed of ceramic versus bed of platinum.
Mostly the efficiency is higher. It retains the heat and recycles the heat within it.
Thank you. For the district on page 6, maybe this is the right terminology, and it struck me as something I'm not used to. In the first paragraph, beginning with the source test performed on January 7th, therefore, PTI was not expecting the oxidizer to fail to source test. Is that? It may well be that that's the terminology that is used there.
It should say PTI was not expecting the oxidizer to fail the source test.
I thought that might be the way, but then I thought maybe fail to source test meant something too.
No, just a typo.
Any other questions of the district by the board? Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask if there's anybody from the public that wishes to address this particular petition. Please note there is nobody. The chair closes the hearing at this point on this interim variance petition. At this point, I'd like to ask the board for any comments and their motion to either accept or deny the interim, please.
I would like to comment and sort of in support of Mr. Murphy's concern. We're not really required to make all the findings tonight because this is an interim variance, but in March when we come back on this one, assuming we do, it is going to be a job for the petitioner to convince some of us, maybe all of us, that you didn't kind of go slowly through this process once you knew you had a problem back in last winter. So that's my only comment.
Any other comments from the board? Can I have a motion, please?
I want to make a motion that we accept the petition. I'll second.
You have any discussion? Okay. With that, I'd like to ask clerk to poll the board.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Aye.
Mr. Herlock?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparino?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
And I think it should be noted also that the findings of facts have been addressed by the petitioner by signing, and they were discussed this evening as well. Any other business?
Just before you leave, I've got your claim forms to sign and get back to me.
Okay.
I have just a comment for the district. I know that the South Coast is considering, and I don't know where they are, at some point in the future to treat ROCs as not all alike, but to weight them according to their reactivity and potential for forming pollutants. I'm wondering if somebody in the district is at least following this procedure. I know it's not the kind of thing that our district would probably take the initiative on, but it's something to keep in mind. And it makes sense to me that, I'm not sure, but I think the hexane is typically much more reactive than the IPA, but I could be wrong, and that would mean that not all ROCs need to meet the same pounds per hour requirements. And don't know whether they're going to do that anytime soon or it's way in the future, but I know they're considering it.
Yeah. In some of our rulemakings that we've gone through over the last couple of years, we've had those discussions, and some of the industry people have brought that effort, and I think EPA has come up with some reactivity levels. And so we've had those discussions and kind of keep revisiting it occasionally.
Okay, I'd like to wish everybody a happy holiday since we will not see each other until maybe January. Yes, but there's a comment from the petitioner?
I just want to thank the board and thank the district, especially Mr. Dural, for the cooperation. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and happy holidays.
Seeing that there are no other items of business for this meeting, I hereby adjourn the meeting.